So one thing that I'm looking forward to talking directly to you about is that you work with a lot of clients and you do it face to face, which is very different from how I practice divination. I do face to face divination, but I do it really only in person and with people that I already know really well. So like I actually sort of front load a lot of the, you know, energetic and ethical concerns of doing this kind of work by just having these relationships with people already. And so we're stepping into that practice as like a next step. Whereas you work with people who come to you who you may not have ever heard of or met before, and they want to work with you to understand their place in the universe. And I think that's very tricky. But I also know you think it's very tricky and you care very much about doing a good job of such a tricky thing. So I want to know what kinds of things, what kinds of practices and maybe like rules and restrictions and limits and boundaries, but also, proactive things you help your clients do. What kinds of things do you do to ensure that these tricky things get done well?
Yeah, such a great question. It starts it starts actually before they even get into my Zoom room until they get before they get face to face with me. In the intake form, I give people an opportunity to express themselves, and the first thing that I kind of my little allusion to uh, agency is please share as much or as little as you're comfortable sharing
Mm-hmm.
in this intake form. And then when I do finally get face to face with them, I usually start off with like this flight attendant speech, basically. And I explicitly call it that to them. I say,
Mm-hmm.
here's my flight attendant speech. And it's to set them up, like, because you were mentioning, with people you already know, people you're friends with, have that rapport with. You kind of understand where they are philosophically a little bit more than a complete stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is this kind of reassurance that this person who's coming in, who we don't really know each other, that I'm trying to set up as much safety as possible. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think you can talk about agency without also kind of almost inadvertently considering consent and safety and a lot of other words. So when we get into a session together, I repeat that statement of feel free to share as much or as little as you're comfortable sharing today. I tell them, you know you best. I can think of so many ways and XYZ can come out in the eighth, whatever of the whatever. And it's much easier, quicker, more accurate to just ask someone about that part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell them that as well. So kind of already giving in some philosophical notes, which I will explicitly name as well and say, hey, here's how I think about this stuff. I believe in fate. I also believe in free will.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them those things. We have little philosophical discussions peppered throughout as they need to come in. Some people come into the session, very ready to just be told what to do,
Mm-hmm.
how to act, what choices to make. And I very gently try to, if that does even come up, put that back in their hands and ask them about what their preferences are, what their values are, to kind of get it back into their hands, because agency really is that ability to act. And I want to instill that in people. So yeah, like it starts off even before they get into session. It continues when we're setting up the session together. I also tell people they can disagree with me. I'm going to give them a bunch of options of how things could come out. It's like going to the eye doctor, is this one better or this one?
Mm-hmm.
is this one clear? Is this you or is this one you? And if this one is not you, then we can go and find a better direction. So it's like this, I say it's a collaborative activity together today, that we're going to figure out how your chart is coming out for you, or, what this situation is going to, maybe the fuzzy outline of it in the future. So those are just some like verbal ways that I do that, that I try to kind of cultivate or instill agency, whatever words you want to use. Because when you're dealing with fate, it's always, I think it's good to remember that, we can make choices and take actions. It's not just fate alone, in my own philosophical opinion.
That philosophical direction and the fact that you have that conversation with a client, so to sort of adjust for whatever differences in perspective you're going to encounter, and surely there will be many, That whole angle sounds very juicy to me, but I actually wanted to pick up on a more specific detail that you raised about astrological technique, which definitely comes out of in order to relate to astrology this way, I feel like you need a certain philosophical point of view about what it is and what it's for and how it works. And, what I might point to, what we could call the traditional astrological point of view, as being like pretty serious when it comes to the implications of various techniques. And it sort of has that reputation, especially for people who are coming from a more modern sort of like, this is all just a reflection of you kind of point of view. Traditional astrology can have some pretty profound and intense and maybe even alarming things to say. And so what I feel like I heard you saying is that if you look at a chart and you go, oop, and you see something like that, rather than put it on them, you might ask, you would ask an open-ended question to that person about how that sort of thing that subject area in general might have appeared to them in their life, and use that as a way in. Can you talk more about what some of those things are, what some of those techniques are, like when you might employ that strategy when you're looking at a chart?
Yeah, sure. So, like one example that comes up really commonly is in the romantic sphere.
Mhm.
People are coming in usually because they're not having a great time with romance. And they're wondering if, like, first, what their fate is about these matters. Am I doomed, or, is this gonna work out eventually? And I can give them, it's usually a pretty nuanced discussion about, well, here's the factors that I see, here's the quality of things that I see, and then this is how you can meet that. You have some choices and some options about how you want to respond to that. And to be very frank, it's 100% my Buddhism coming in, saying there's an option to respond to everything that happens, whatever the etiology, wherever it came from, whether it was fate or free will or someone else's free will or whatever. We have the ability to pause and choose how we respond to it. And so in an, more of a metaphysical reading session where we're looking at the quality of someone's life in a certain area, I'm going to be honest with them, like, oh yeah, I see these challenges, and that can be really validating. Okay, now realistically, now that we can realistically see clearly what is here in your life based on what you're telling me, what I'm seeing, then you can take that information and act with agency, more agency than you might have had without that information.
And not doing it that way. And you've probably had consults with other astrologers when you were the client, and I certainly have, where like people don't quite have this touch, and it can sort of have the opposite effect, right? Where like they throw something at you that takes your agency away, and you have to reckon with that. It sounds like this agency is this concept, this unifying concept behind all the things we're talking about, is a really good like compass for you ethically, because what you're trying to do is help people deal with things that might come up, and in that sense, get like a challenge, something that might look like an ill omen in like very pure divinatory ways, is actually sort of, it's empowering information for them to have.
Yes, yeah.
Clearly, though, all of this is bound up in the sort of metaphysics of what you do, and I wonder how prepared people are for that, by and large, like what the sort of range is of when people come to you, of how prepared they are to deal with a world that works that way, or whether they have, what other biases they might have, like what kinds of sort of metaphysical conflicts arise in a reading, and how do you work through them?
Yeah, because there is such a broad range. I'm just thinking about that whole spectrum of which has been discussed previously about determinism versus, totally fate, partial determinism, which, fate plus free will, and then, how's this all working? The one I find for me personally that comes in the most commonly is I believe in free will. I'm the surprised one, like how many people come in, especially people pretty new to metaphysics, that are like very hard fate.
Hmm.
Like, oh, this stuff's going to happen. There's nothing I can do. I want someone else to just kind of tell me how bad it is. And then I don't know, we're just kind of hanging out with how bad it is. Like, nah, I don't operate that way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so how do I mean, but then it is really a philosophical kind of discussion to have. And, you know, what are the nuances here of what we're working with? Because I think it is important to take the time out of, you know, the fun symbolic reading stuff that we do to have these more undergirding discussions. Because yeah, like if someone comes in and they're just absolutely determined that they're cursed and there's nothing that they can do, I mean, yeah, I guess I just try to gently, I mean, it's like, I want to honor people's beliefs, right? We got to respect that other people are going to have a different philosophical thing in mind. So in that case, like if that action piece isn't really easy to get to, then I kind of pull the resourcing in. Okay, well, if this is so faded, then what's the good stuff that's faded? And then we can look at that and then, you know, maybe focus on that. So, and then I tell people too in those situations, you know, okay, all beliefs aside, I don't care what's true. I know that my quality of life feels better when I think I have an ability to control my situation a little bit. It just feels better. So you know what? That's how I'm going to act. I'm going to just act like I can actually do things to change this, even if I don't know if that's true or not.
It feels like there's kind of two directions you can go from the philosophical problem, and the one that you just described is sort of the psychological, like I don't want to make like a spatial metaphor that doesn't make sense, but it's like you can go in that direction where you act as if certain things in order to process it from a place of well-being. Then I feel like the other direction that it can go, which is the one I want to ask about now, is like, you know, in the tradition, it's called remediation. Like it's from the philosophical place of like, this is how the world works and this is what it says, or you know, works or doesn't work, and this is what it says about you and your life. The next step kind of gets into the realm of like the religious, right? It's like the things, the ways that you can work with fate and reality in order to you know, disrupt or adjust or change the manifestation of fated things. And, you know, frequently in our line of work, that sort of thing is best described in sort of like magical or ritual terms or religious terms. So like what kinds of ethical considerations do you have about ways people might have differences in vocabulary or practice about how to deal with the things that they learn in a consult?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is part of why I left the old job that I had, the old career, and went to this one, is because I feel like there is just so much more agency here. I'm not barred into some system, some material world system run by a bunch of, you know, people or whatever that aren't changing anytime soon. I feel like in the more metaphysical realm, the spiritual realm, the remediatory stuff that we can do, it feels like so much more helpful, and like there's so much more control in my locus, you know. So that's thing one. Thing two, I guess, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, well, it's sort of like
yeah, the remediatory approach.
Yeah. And how those things are kind of religious in nature, and how you might work with somebody, especially if you have different ways of going about those things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is where I feel into that person, and as we're talking, I'll try to get a lock on, okay, what are the vocab or what's the vocabulary we have? What is their context? Because if I'm praying to Asclepius, and I have someone coming in who's like, you know, just like a normal, not metaphysical, regular person who's definitely not going to be, I'm praying to Asclepius, I'm going to have a hard time like using my own stuff with them.
Sure.
So say they are Catholic and they need something in a hurry, I'm going to tell them to pray to Saint Expedite, you know? You know, so my own, I mean, ethically speaking, or I guess my own ethos and my own practice is I better be well-rounded enough, at least to understand when something isn't in my own dialect. And then be able to try to meet them there. But also referrals. I love referring people out to other practitioners who are better equipped for, say, like, you know, geotish remediation. I'll send someone, not me. But it, you know, it can be a really, I don't know, supportive place of ritual I think there's an opening into really supportive ritual that, okay, if we can see what's here clearly in terms of challenges, we can see clearly the challenges, we can see where maybe some of the resourcing is. And then it's like important for the professional to be somewhat decent at triage. And part of that is really good interviewing skills to understand. And now I'm totally getting medical on people, but it's like, what have you already tried? What has not worked? What has worked? What makes it feel better? What makes it feel worse? What's your history with this? And then I can start to maybe try to give them some helpful things, because what I don't think is ethical is to just tell someone a bunch of difficult things and then not point them toward the resourcing, or not, as much as, okay, on its own, it can be really validating to hear the difficulties and the challenges. Yes, thank you. I'm not nuts. I'm not making it up. It kind of ungaslights people. But then beyond that, it is, in my opinion, best practices to then give them something to help, give them some hope, and not false hope, but like, hey, here's where there's some good stuff in your chart. Ask those people, or here's some other, remediatory practices or professionals who could help with that. So yeah, I'm very much like a resource-centered person. So I've got a whole document of links to helpful things, cute poems, fun TED Talks that I can just send to people, like little cosmic breadcrumbs. Because I don't think it's ethical to just say a bunch of difficult things, even if it's validating, and then leave it like that. It's like there needs to be some kind of care in there.
You just anticipated so many different versions of the question that was arising for me about, but what it's basically about is like your training for this, because you said something about being well-rounded, and I think that that's like one of the best pieces of like astrologer to astrologer advice there is just like learn about humanity and history and culture and all the sort of background things that underlie like the projections that come up in someone's like personal spiritual work. But then you brought it to the place of like your sort of medical diagnosis abilities also. And I'm thinking about the ways that one has to learn on the job of doing this kind of thing. But I also feel like you have lots of stuff in your background that inclines you to this kind of work. So can you just tell me like sort of what prepared you to sit in this chair in these ways, in these sort of like infrastructural supportive ways, more than like the sort of spiritual gnosis like wizard ways? Like what are the support systems that you had that taught you how to be a support system?
Oh yeah. Oh wow, that's such a great question. Certainly, got so much on the job training. There's so many things. Now I'm just going to start talking trash about my education, my previous educational experience, and what they did not train me in so many important ways. And I had to figure this stuff out over the course of 13 years of having really difficult conversations with people, and just every 40, 50, 60 hours a week, just people coming to me with difficult things. And like, there's so much more than just the facts, the data, even the remediation. There's so much more than that just on paper. Like all of the care that go in the exchanges and the communication and the ways of saying things, and definitely the ways of not saying things, and what's important, what's not, what can we just ignore right now, prioritization. A lot of that was literally just 13 years of being in it. And I think frequently, and I think about writing my old university letters, being like, hey buddies, we got some work to do, because you are not giving us the proper training. So support for me in this quest, just all of, I guess, the teachers and mentors I had who I watched, all of the other care providers who I just watched them, and then I learned things. I personally have just self-directed my own learning so much, not to like humble brag or anything, but to just say the amount of effort I've had to put into to like get in other training, like from behavioral medicine people, my continuing education from pharmacy. Thankfully there are people out there putting out resources on how to just do a better job of counseling a variety of diverse people. I've done it in my own, quest in Buddhism and spirituality. All of that too has been mega supportive, but yeah, that was never spoon fed to me. I had to go seek out a lot of ancillary help, because I was in those situations with people, even in my past career and this career, and it's just going to happen. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your practice, I don't think, or you're doing something unethical when you get someone in front of you for the first time that is like, wow, I didn't know I was going to be having this conversation today. Wow, I didn't know I was going to be navigating these life topics. So yeah, and you just do, and it's very, you got to be brave, and hopefully that other person is also being brave and everyone's being brave.
So when you first sat down, like for your first consult, I'm not like expecting you to remember vividly your very first consult, although maybe you do. Like what was going through your mind facing the real person for the first time?
I was just like so excited and full of young puppy energy that that's what I remember, is the vibe going in. And I remember it, like I was so nervous, but I remember my first few, thankfully they were with some people that I knew, at least ancillarily online. And we had so much fun. And it was so fun just like sharing astrology with them, and they were having a good time learning about themselves. And, I kept it pretty light in those like earlier readings, of course, but like, yeah, I just remember being extremely nervous and trying to remember like Bruce Springsteen's quote, which I don't even like Bruce Springsteen's music or anything, but he said, it's not that I'm nervous when I'm having stage fright, it means I'm ready. And so I was like, yeah, I'm ready.